I'm Pete Tigers, and this is the Fly Culture Podcast. My guest for today can truly be called a fly fishing all-rounder. He is at home on the trout streams of Devon and Cornwall, catches pike from the drains of Somerset, bass and mullet from the coastline, and is at home on the bonefish and permit flats of the Caribbean. I'm sure I've only scratched the surface, but you'll see we have much to talk about. I'd like to welcome Rodney Wevill to the podcast. Rodney, it's great to have you along, buddy. How are you today?
Hi, Pete. Great to be on. I'm very well, thank you. Not enjoying all the weather we're having and the dreadful rain, and the rivers are all out of action and not enough fishing. But other than that, I'm very well, thank you.
It's great to have you along, and I've got a bone to pick with you to start with. I noticed that you actually picked that little window when the Tamar was fishable and went and caught a bloody grayling, and that was magnificent timing, and I was incredibly jealous, and I was sort of watching gauges and everything else, and then I saw your social media post, and bang, you were out there and managed to time it perfectly.
Yes, I seen an opportunity. I actually fished 3 days running, Saturday, Sunday and Monday. Saturday it was still very high and quite dirty, and I managed the grayling. I went back on the Sunday morning and I had one just shy of 2 pounds and one at 1.5 pounds. And I went back again on the Monday and had another one 1.75 pounds and another one 1.5 pounds. And as you know, on the River Tamar, that's very good fish. So just caught it right, and it's not been fishable since. I think it was something like 7 or 8 feet above normal level yesterday. Still running at 5 today.
Yeah, it's a big old river at the moment. It's been a funny one, hasn't it, with all this crappy weather, that I think this is the longest spell, personally speaking, that I've gone without grayling fishing. It's just been ridiculous. I don't even think I've done any since the season ended, actually, thinking about it. I'm sure I did some on the chalk streams before they got shot, but even the one that I fish there is unfishable at the moment. And do you deal with crappy conditions well? Is it easy for you, or do you sit down and divert yourself away, tie some flies, do something different?
I don't cope very well at all. Obviously fly tying, but if you tie the flies, you want to use them. I just find it very difficult, and because I fish for so many different species, and I'm willing to travel up to the likes of Wimbleball and fish for the rainbows. I can generally find some fix at some point, but it's nothing like normal times at all. So I find it difficult.
Mind you, with those tiny windows, I'll take those size of grayling that you've been catching, because for listeners, putting it in context, we don't have big populations of grayling, and certainly sizable grayling like that. The 2 pound fish is and 1.75 pounds, pretty special, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know that much about the fish itself, but I believe they run in sort of cycles over a few years, and I feel that if that's true, we're on a cycle where we got some good fish at the moment. So I feel that we're being robbed of some good fish if we could only have been on the water a bit more. Because all these fish I've been catching have been more or less in a 50 yards stretch of the river. They're together, and I haven't experienced too much of that in the last 3 seasons. So, yeah, I feel a little bit robbed, really.
Yeah, I'll take those fish, I have to say. But and like we said, the timing was perfect. So when things do calm down, whenever that will be, we've had heavy rain here this morning. It's very, very early January. What are you going to do? Where are you going to head? And what species are you going to go for?
Well, traditionally, I would, from end of October through to the end of river course season, mid-March, I'd be on the pike 2 to 3 times a week on the Somerset Levels. And I've got into the grayling a little bit more. It's something I used to do when I was a child or at 10 years old with the fly. Come back to it more in the last 3 years, and I predominantly use tight line nymph tactics because it's such a difference from pulling flies. I spend most of the year pulling flies, whether it's for pike, whether it's on still waters like situ for pike, but it's po. You go for the bass, it's pulling flies. Rainbow trout, it's quite often pulling flies. And even probably my best love in the UK at the moment is the first 6 weeks of brown trout season. And I fish Colliford and Fernworthy in particular, and Whistling Pounds. It's not the flowing waters and the rivers and the dry fly and the sort of stuff that you do, Pete, but I find it. I love that type of fishing, the casting, walking, and I think there's a few stockfish, a mixture of stockfish and wild fish, and I absolutely love that. But that's another couple months away, so it would be the Somerset Levels and the Pike at the moment, really. And I'm still managing once a week, but it's very difficult up there at the moment to find water to fish, and the fish seem to be anchored on the bottom, not wanting to chase anything. It's difficult. It is very difficult.
Yeah. I guess we've just got to be patient right now, haven't we? And hang in there. And I'm thrilled that you mentioned Colliford as well, because I guess, as you alluded to, that people would probably think that dry fly and a river is my home, which it is largely. But Colliford, to me, which you mentioned, I think it is one of those really, really special places. I did a podcast live from there with my friend Duncan, which was really good fun. He tied up a fly and he used it and caught a bunch of fish. And it is a really, really special place, isn't it?
Oh, you can just get lost on your own. You can be away for 6-7 hours, and that walk, cast, and there's miles and miles. It's wild. We normally, when we're fishing it, those first 6 weeks, it can be stormy, lots of rain, 40-mile-an-hour winds, but it's just incredible fishing, incredible scenery, and I find I like Fernworthy better on Dartmoor, but it's not so big, so you can't quite get lost in the same way, but it's just as picturesque in every way. And the standard of browns that were coming out early season, were very, very good. A lot of 2-pound fish. I think the biggest I had last year was shade over 2.5, but there was a lot of 2-pound fish, and a lot of fish around the sort of 14 inches, probably around the pound mark. Incredible fishing, and I excelled because I actually dry fly fished somewhat. No particular finesse, but it was a sugar cube shipments, and I was having them off the top. So, and that made my season, really, because I've not done a lot to the dry fly fishing. So, yeah, living and learning all the time.
Lovely. And for listeners, the Colliford is on the A30 in Cornwall. So if you're ever heading down that way, and Rodney said that, you walk and cast, to put it in context, it's 970 acres, I think. It's something like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's absolutely huge. And it is just a wonderful place to go fish. And then Fernworthy is near Morton Hampstead on the Dartmoor, which, as you say, is a little bit smaller and great fun. And they're brown trout only fisheries, which are interesting. The one you've missed out of the famous three is Rowford. And for listeners, again, it's based on the A30, and that was also a brown trout or is a brown trout fishery as well. Have you got yourself up there? Because the word that's synonymous, really, isn't it, with Rowford, sadly, the last 10, 15 years has been perch, hasn't it? And how have you been up there? And have you been fishing up there? How's it been?
I could get myself in trouble here, really. Rowford is actually 5 minutes from my doorstep. Some very good fishing. I think we're suffering on both Colliford and Rowford with carp. Colliford in particular, there's massive amounts of carp. They seem to be eating a lot of the food. making it difficult for the trout. Rodford again has got a big population of carp and getting bigger, but they are fair play to Southwest Lakes. They're trying to eradicate a few and take them to different venues and sell them on. But then, as you've already said, we've got a perch problem. And I've found until the end of April, the fishing is extremely good. Once we get into May, it can be a 3-inch perch. It doesn't matter how many flies you got on the team, 3 flies, it'll be 3 at a time. And I've had days where I've done 150 little tiny perch in a little over an hour and a half. I mean, hands have bled with taking them off. And it just spoils the whole experience. So I tend not to fish Rodford as much as I would really like to, especially being on the doorstep.
Yeah, it's a real shame, and it's a beautiful setting, that one as well, isn't it? Whereas Colliford's more brutal, isn't it? That it's open,
Yes.
a vast expanse of water. Whereas you've got, I remember used to head to Fish Shop or wherever it was and fish round there and have some great fun there, and hawthorn fly as well when they were out. I happened to hit that perfectly there one time, which was really, really special, and it's sad to hear that. And I suppose that's difficult to get something like that back under control, or do you need some pike?
I don't know what the powers to be would think of having pike in at Rodford, with the River Woth being a tributary of the Frushells Lid and then the Tamer system. I think probably that would be the only thing other than a natural disease that would do anything with them. I mean, it's literally hundreds of thousands of fish. And being so many fish, they're not actually growing on to be a sizable fish. They're just multiplying massively, but staying quite small. And I think ultimately, if this doesn't change, it will be the ruin of the lake completely. And Colliford's suffering. That's which should be 2 of our best waters in the southwest. Rodford, it really should be top class brown trout water, and sadly, it's not.
Yeah, it's a great shame, and we hope something will happen or something will change. Perhaps somebody's listening who may be able to help and advise at some stage. But let's move on a little bit. Would it be fair to say fly fishing is a sizable part of your life?
Yes, I started fishing when I was about 8 years old. My brother and brother-in-law that were both brother-in-laws sadly passed, but my brother's still with us. They were 16, 17 years older than me. And they used to take me with a bucket of worms, and we would worm. By the age of 10, I was sea trout fishing with worms during the night, and my brother started fly fishing. I'd had some lessons with Roy Buckingham that you must well know, and I really, really took to the idea of this fly fishing. So it wasn't long before I've got myself a setup, and brother gave me a few lessons, but he wasn't that good at it. So it was down to myself, really. And from 10 years old, I've not learned to cast properly, but it was on the River Frushill and the likes of underneath trees. And one thing I did learn was how to put a fly in a very difficult place from a very early age. And at that time, I used to dry fly fish quite a bit. By the time I was 12, I was actually dreadful for my mother, because I'd go away sea trout fishing. She'd say, we'll be back by 10. I wasn't getting home until 2 in the morning. And this is when I was 12 years old. and the fly fishing really was a big part of my fishing right through until I was about 15. And life took a little bit of a twist. A delinquent of a school pupil, turned to punk rock, and spent about 3 or 4 years listening to music, and punk rock was the big thing at the time. and fishing went out of the window somewhat, probably like it does with a lot of teenagers. Then I came back to it for a while, mainly chucking flying seas and stuff like that to salmon. The sea trout still held a big appeal to me. So if I could, I'd be out with the fly rod always for the sea trout. And then at 1920, I got into enduro motocross bikes. And the next 6 years, I basically rode national level, then international level, a reasonable level of sport. And that consumed every moment of my life at the time. And I suppose that took me up until I was about 26. And injury forced me to stop that. I tried to carry on, but I just couldn't sustain the level that I had achieved, and I lost interest. I didn't want to be an also ran. I wanted to keep achieving, and I couldn't. And pressure of business at home, family business, it was there for me to take on. So I stopped the motorbikes, went into business. Well, that was a bigger distraction from fishing. But I was in the builders merchant industry for the next 20 years, more or less, but I still fished. Every now and again, we'd go sea fishing with the bait casters, and there was always some sort of fishing. A little bit more salmon fishing, but still chucking flying seas. I came out of the merchant game in 2000 or 1999, I think it was, and I was still in the construction industry, but not the merchant side. It gave me a lot more time. I took up horse riding for a while. I've done a little bit, not major competitive stuff. I've done a little bit of low class show jumping. I hunted, and unfortunately, that with all the years on a motorbike at very high speed, I only had a few injuries. But with the horses, I had a big injury. I came off and broke my neck in two places. That wasn't so bad, but I had swelling on the brain. Lucky to be here. And from 2001 to 2006, it totally changed my life. The swelling on the brain caused depression. So I had mental issues for those 5 years. Some would say I'm not fully recovered, but I struggled for a long time. And I started getting involved with fishing again after, I think it was probably 2010. I got back again, just spinning flying seas for salmon. And I think 2012, I'd caught a salmon, 13 pounds on the tamer, flying sea hanging out of his mouth. And I thought, this isn't for me anymore. It's just brutal. So I decided I was going to fly fish for the salmon. That's not been very successful since I started that, but the numbers were dwindling. So I'd spend the rest of the time sea trout fishing on the tamer at night. That was relatively successful up until 2018, and the numbers have just dwindled and dwindled. So the salmon fishing there was hardly a salmon in the river, and the opportunities were so small. And the river tamer, every time it was sensible, it wasn't, because it was dirty. And by the time it cleared, it wasn't that fishable for the salmon. So things had to change, and I decided that I'd get myself a 9-weight and bass fish. With the thought, I'll go pike fishing in the winter. This will make use of the rod, and I think it was actually a bit earlier, and that was 2016. I'd done the season on this bass, and I went pike fishing for the first time that autumn. Caught a pike the first time. Went back 3 or 4 days later and had a double 10-pound fish, and I was totally hooked. From that day, I've been absolutely hooked on the pike, and since then, angling, fly fishing has become probably 90% of my life. Whether it's the fluff chuckers and social media, but everything involved with fly fishing. It saved me from myself after that accident. There's no doubt about it. The friends I've met along the way, all the people I've met along the way, it's just been a real journey, a real pleasure. And even though I've done these sports, believe it or not, I'm not particularly competitive. I do trout competitions, but there's never a competitive edge on me to try to beat somebody else. The competitive bit is with myself. All I want to do is to achieve what I want to achieve. And if I don't achieve what I want to achieve, then I'm not happy. But I'm not worried who's beating me. I just want to progress. And I just find it, you've got to push yourself to actually go that further along. But hence, I suppose I've diversified into so many different branches of fly fishing, whether it's carp, pike, brown trout, rainbow trout, grayling, you name it. If you can catch it or try to catch it on a fly rod, I'll have a go.
Lovely. A beautiful story, and I'm pleased you're well on the way to the mend as well, and how fly fishing has been such an integral and important part of your recovery process and continues to be. And I'm really, really thrilled to hear that. And it's fascinating because your story, and having fished with you a little bit as well, that's, before you said it, was in my mind that you'd like to, and you said about the motocross as well, the riding, you strike me as the person who wants to do something to the best of their ability. And you summed it up perfectly, that you want to do it really, really well when you enter into something. And for me, the really interesting thing was how you came back into fishing. It wasn't the direction I thought you were going to say. I thought it was going to be, right, well, I wandered down to the Thrushall, which I guess is pretty damn close to where you live, and got the rod out and had a go. It was a slightly different route in, wasn't it? And an interesting one to find, yet has taken you in a fascinating direction anyway. And you're almost coming back in some respects to the more traditional species via the direction you initially took.
Oh, certainly. When I decided to put all the tackle away in the garage other than fly rods, which was 2012, I've not fished a rod other than a fly rod since 2012. That time it really was for the bigger fish. I wasn't a bit interested on going to the River Lid or the River Thrushall, but in those 12-year period, it's just interested me and involved, and and every aspect of fishing you can apply to the other aspect, and that's something I really have learned. As I said, I do a few smaller competitions like the 4-man team on Sibley Back and stuff like that on the rainbows, and the only thing that really interested me with that initially was it was good practice for mullet fishing, believe it or not, because I could go down there and stand in the wind, and most people would go with the wind behind them, and I'd stand with 40-mile-an-hour winds coming right at me, because that's what I've got on the coast or on the estuary quite a lot of the time with a 6-weight. And then I quickly learned that I could catch fish when we were pulling, and I could do as well as a lot of them, if not all of them, while I was pulling. and the fish were up for it. But the minute it went dead, I was struggling. And a good friend of mine, Roger Truscott, he has helped me so much with that and taught me so much. And that's all I wanted to do then, was to go to that next level when nobody can catch a fish, but those chosen few carry on catching. Maybe not so many fish, but they carry on catching. And that's what I wanted to somewhat achieve, to get to that level where I can still wriggle a fish out when it's really tough. And I've not really got there completely, but with the rainbows, I've almost got there. So I've used it for a purpose. It's every form of that fishing can apply. Whether it's grading or whether it's pike, there's something that you can take from one and take to the other, and it progresses you along the line. There's no doubt about it. It is a forever learning curve.
And there's some really great points there as well about, you said about the casting. And of course, we know, don't we, that the food's being blown into that bay where the wind is, and, the ability to be able to turn your flies over into there makes life a whole lot easier. But that experience, that's the wonderful thing. And you must be thrilled to see, and you've been part of this as well, but you must be thrilled to see how anglers now are adopting the approaches that you've taken and are looking to target many other species with a fly rod and saying, well, actually, yeah, we can do this. And as you'll well know, we've seen these sort of little ripples over the years, but it really feels now that it is part of fly fishing, isn't it? It's not sort of a niche sport. I think people like yourself and Colin and Paul and Mullet as well, and the pike anglers, what you've done with Pike, you and Jethro and others, of course, that it's part of what we do now, isn't it? I'm a fly angler rather than a trout angler, and that seems to be the direction, at least I'm detecting, that we're starting to go in, isn't it?
Yes, and I totally agree with that. And also the trade, the whole business, the trade, the fly fishing, it's got to go that way. Otherwise, it's going to die. The youngsters aren't coming in. That's why with fluff juckers, the first event we ever done was a multi-species on chew. When we were first going to chew, the pike anglers didn't seem to speak to the trout anglers, and the trout anglers put their nose up to the pike anglers. And I said to Jethro, I said, we're going to do something different. We're going to have a multi-species: brown trout, rainbow trout, perch, and pike. So didn't know how it was going to go down. Ran the event, had reasonable uptake, and they all loved it. And there were British national trout anglers came and joined in, and all aspects: saltwater fly fishermen, pike, and they just joined together. And from that day on, the community in the Chew car park is different. There's no doubt about it. The trout anglers speak, but I think we've made aware that we all need each other. The days we've spent on there, and you were on there with Jeffrey when you had that nice fish earlier in the year, quite often there's 4 or 5 pike boats, and you don't see anybody fishing for trout, maybe off the bank, but hardly any. The pike anglers with the trials, I think they're probably propping up the water as a trout fishery, and the people that are transferred from maybe river brown trout to the mullet or to the bass, it's got to happen. Otherwise, the whole industry, I think, will collapse eventually. It'll be such a niche thing. But I think it's got some sort of future at the moment with what's happening.
There's some really good points, and I think we need to embrace all aspects of it, which, like we say, is a wonderful drive that we're actually seeing in fishing to keep it pushing on. And it was fascinating what you said to me about the kids not doing it, and it reminded me of what you said earlier, that we have these wonderful schemes to encourage kids and plant the seed with them. And I think what happens, and I'm guilty of it, you said you were, that you fished when you were kids and then you walk away with it. But now with this wider range of species that people can attack or chase or whatever you want to call it, then it's a little easier to do that, isn't it, for people
Yeah,
to come into it? Because I think, and I say it all the time, and it really pisses me off, that J.R. Hartley advert in my opinion, did a lot of damage to fly fishing, because everyone thought we were genteel old men in check
yeah, yeah,
shirts and stuff like that. So that's that perception of it. And it does still piss me off to this day. Whereas if you're living in, let's say, Birmingham, for example, you've got canals there. You've got
yeah,
places
yeah.
you can go. You can go to the coast to catch mullet, like you say, or bass, or whatever it may be. And, bass is a great place to start, isn't it? And then can lead you on to the mullet as well. And then that's a whole different world altogether. But we've got all of these things. And, of course, carp as well, which you've touched on. That, I was lucky to catch some wild carp last year or the year before, I can't remember now. It was just mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. And however you want to do it is fine. And then you can adapt your technique to the waters that you're fishing, the way that you're fishing. There's so many spheres of it now that we can look at, isn't it? And I think, like you say, you made such a great point that this is probably what's going to help push fly fishing on, isn't it? And continue to push it on and grow it.
Well, like I said, I think it needs it. Otherwise, we're going to have a struggle to survive. I think, especially the trout fisheries. I really can't see a big healthy future for them unless we can get people back into the sport. I've been a businessman, and people say, well, such and such is fishing crap. We were having 30 fish a day, and they were all, they were £5 to £8. Well, that's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. A good day for me on Wimbleball is to catch 5 or 6 fish, and you've had to work damn hard all day. And if they're £3 to £5, they're damn good fish. And if there's a surprise in amongst it as well, but to go there and expect 20, 30, 40 fish, it's ludicrous. And it wasn't like it 40 years ago. I know it wasn't like it. And I don't know what's driven that. What is it? Just the human nature and the world we're living in? I don't know. I don't know the answer to it. People have got greedy, I think.
Yeah.
But fisheries are just, they can't sustain that. They'll be out of business. It's very difficult. Very difficult. But at least with the salt water and the coarse side of things, it's relatively inexpensive. So that's a good way for people to get involved. Take mullet. There's no shortage of mullet. Probably the most difficult fish in the world. I would put them above permit in difficulty. Don't know. I do see a future, but I think it's a tough road.
Yeah. Well, all we can do, and I know you're doing your part, is to continue to push fishing in a positive way and let people know the many different things that they can target with a fly rod, and explore those things and go for it. I think, I think a little bit about this fish thing. I wonder if social media puts people under an unnecessary pressure to catch fish for photographs. And, I'm sure you're very similar, that if I've got something to say, I say it. I don't feel I've got to put a picture of an old fish up it doesn't matter. And I always say to people, once I've pressed like, I've probably forgotten about it anyway. And so don't worry about it. Don't put yourself under pressure. Enjoy fishing for what it is. Go to these beautiful places. Sometimes try not even taking a photo. See how that feels as well. And you can smile inwardly at a wonderful job you've done. And I've done that many times last year, and it's been great to be able to do it. So don't put yourself under pressure about it. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. We'll be thrilled for you, but don't feel that you've got to do something for the sake of it. Do you think when you were saying that, I felt that there was an element of that, and I've noticed it over the festive period. I've tried to not engage in social media as much over Christmas as well, and probably will continue to. I like seeing the pictures, don't get me wrong, but I want the pictures like, the one that you have from the Tamar really made me smile, because I think, oh man, I've missed it. And that's the wonderful thing about it. There's not a pressure, is there, to have to put an old picture of a trout you caught 6 months ago just to be relevant. It doesn't matter, does it?
No, it doesn't. And unfortunately, I think most of us, if we're really honest, that we've all got egos of who are quite egotistic, and it's a progression. I think when you start fishing, it's how many fish you can catch. Then it's the biggest fish you can catch. So this eagle thing grows somewhat, and then you refine and get better, like an old wine, I suppose. And it's not so important. It's the way you catch the fish. It's the overall, it's the experience. Nature comes into it more, and I think you just evolve into a different person the more you do it. Some people will never will. Some people are probably not so competitive, not got such a big an ego all the way through, but the majority of us have got a reasonable ego, but we've got to just sort this out in our own heads, I think, and it does take a while, but we do evolve as we go along. There's no doubt about it. And yeah, take that pressure. Nobody else can take that pressure away from you. You've got to take it away from yourself. And there's no better way than to actually pick up a 6'6" cane rod and go down with a dry fly in the summer. And if there's an hatch on and you actually catch something like that, and it's just brilliant, and it all brings everything back to earth, really, and simplicity. And I quite like the simplicity of it all, really. We can overcomplicate things very easily.
Yeah, like your style immensely. Let's move on a little bit then. We've talked about all these species. What's your favourite?
In the UK or world?
Let's start with UK, because we're going to come on to, I've got another question for you on that as well.
Favourite species in the UK? Probably the pike. Yes, the pike. It's all to do, if you're lucky enough, and because I do a lot on the rivers and drains rather than the boat, but even on the boat, if you're lucky enough to get that take and the visual take, I don't think there's a lot better. They're incredible. Savages when they want to be. And yeah, so in the UK, I would say pike.
Lovely. And as we've got you here, I'm going to urge people to have a look at Fluff Chuckers, because there's lots of information there in the community that you have. But give me, what's the one piece of advice that you would give the aspiring pike angler with a fly?
Difficult one. I think probably if you've been out and done a little bit to it, not getting on that well, find somebody that's done a lot more. There's a lot of people that are willing to share. You don't have to pay them to guide you, but you can do that. But find somebody that's just moderately successful and been doing it for a few years, that's willing to go out with you and spend a day with somebody that knows. Or, as we done earlier on in the end of last year, we done the pike fly introduction weekend. Join something like that. I mean, that only cost them £15 for 2 days fishing. They had some knowledgeable people to help them, and myself, which is probably not so knowledgeable, but we had Oliver Cullingford. I mean, Somerset Levels man through and through, exceptionally good angler. There were people like that to help them, and just 2 days on the water with people that had a little idea about how to go about it and how to set it up. But if you want to get on it, and there's nothing like that around at the time, just find somebody, get on social media, ask, don't be afraid to ask, put up a post, who goes out, where do you go, would you mind if I tack along? Somebody will, and you will learn very quickly, and probably you'll make a friend right away. 99% sure you'll make a friend.
Nice.
That's my advice.
Yeah, very, very good. Like that as well. Tell me, we touched on overseas there. You're an experienced mullet angler. You've caught loads of bonefish. Are there similarities?
Yes. They look vaguely similar. The mullet is the nearest thing we've got to a bonefish in the UK. I think the similarity stopped really after that. Yes, I suppose we're catching them in skinny water. The bonefish and the mullet are in skinny water. The mullet go off relatively quick, but a bonefish to me is so easy because they're greedy little blighters, so that they generally take. They go off like a bat out of hell. After you've caught one, from there on, you just laugh every time they go because they're not particularly necessarily big fish, but a 3 or 4 pound bonefish is just gone. And then I found very quickly that when they've done their first run, they were coming back on an arc. They'd come somewhat back, then they'd go on a second run. Obviously, they were retiring then. Then it was all over, and it came to your hand fairly quickly. The mullet, different kettle of fish. They don't want to feed. There's no other word. They're bastards. They're very difficult to catch. We never seem to understand them. No matter how much you spend, how many hours, what you cast at them, you never really understand them. You think you've understood them on a certain day because it's gone well, and it never works again. They don't run as hard as a bone, but they just so dogged. They're so dogged. A golden grey's got quite a bit of speed. A thin lip's got quite a bit of speed. A thick lip is a mixture of all sorts of things. It's a mixture of a dogged carp hanging on the bottom. They're incredible. They're incredible. So I don't think they're that similar, really.
That's nice. And that's good to hear. And would you say the behaviour is more permit-like than bonefish?
Yes. Yeah. The same when you compare a permit and a JC of similar size. They both run. A JC is incredibly strong. But normally, after that first big run, and you might get them back a bit, and they might have another run, then it's fairly straightforward. I found with the permit, they'll go, and when they start to come back, then they turn and they go, and then they do that 2 or 3 more times, and then when you get them to hand, no, it's not all over. It's like we never seem to get a mullet in the net the first chance. It's 5 times we'll show them a net, and a permit you'll put your hand to them 5 times before you got hold of them. So I think a permit and a mullet, a thick lip mullet, are very similar.
Nice. Yeah, perfect. Let's move on. You're in the process of getting yourself qualified as a coach stroke instructor. Was this a next logical step for you? Because to me, it strikes me that yourself and Jethro as well are doing a lot for the community. And was this the next, it made sense to do it for you?
It was something that I've played around and done a little bit of guiding on the Pike, and I like my fishing too much to take it very seriously. And this at the Saltwater Fly Festival this year, or the Orvis Saltwater Fly Festival, they asked me to guide, and I could muck in and do whatever I wanted, really. But I decided to help Colin with the mullet classes. Colin had hurt his knee, so was struggling a little bit. So that was the sensible place to spend my time over the weekend. I quite enjoyed it. In fact, I really enjoyed it, and they've asked me to go next year, so I'll do that next year. But it got me thinking a little bit, and I've got a bigger part of me wants to put a bit back. and that's what the introduction pike days were about. And I thought, perhaps I will do a little bit more guiding on the pike on the levels. I'm not that interested in sort of trying to pinch John Horsey's work on the boats on Chew or anything like that, but I want to do a bit on the rivers and the drains. I know it really well. I've been doing it for quite a while, so I'm going to do a bit more guiding. I'll put myself up to do a bit more guiding, and then I just thought to myself, well, actually, I need to know a little bit more about the implications of this. So then I looked into it. So I've done my level 1 angling trust, and this weekend I'm doing the level 2. So you end up, you've got your public liability, you've had your DBS checks, you've done an health and safety, not health and safety, first aid, emergency first aid. You go through safeguarding vulnerable people and children, and none of that, when I'm coming up to 60 years old, lights my candle or floats my boat at all. But it's necessary, and I've found it. I've all those courses I've done, I've found that I've taken something away from it that's been valuable, very valuable. Even the first aid, I came away from that thinking, oh, actually, I could save somebody's life. It's only a small thing, but it's not a small thing, is it? And that could be in any part of the day. That situation could happen in front of me, and I could probably save their life now, where before that course I would have probably been one of those bystanders that looked with my mouth open. And the safeguarding and the children thing I found absolutely fascinating, and we're living in a world that can be really cruel at times. So it's been a journey that I didn't think I was going to enjoy it. I'm hoping I enjoy this weekend. It's 2 days, but I will enjoy it, and I will learn something from it, and it enables you to put something back properly. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, good man. Let's move on a little bit more, and we've touched on fluff chuckers, and it's a wonderful community, and you've talked about some of the events, low-cost events to get people into pike fishing. Can you just give listeners a quick sort of idea of what it is and where people can find your community?
Right. We had a social media group that was called Pike Fly Fishing and Everything Fly. That was moderately successful, and Jeffro and myself were in Mexico 2019-20, and he said, we got to change the name. And I said, what are you thinking? He said, well, we're more than pike anglers, we're into everything. He said, look at, we just had permit, bonefish. So he said, we got to broaden this up, and he came up with the idea of fluff chuckers fly fishing fanatics. So we changed it, and we more or less in that one trip decided that we wanted to be as inclusive as possible to get some of the very, very best in the country at whatever they were doing involved, but to enable the newcomer that not to feel shy, that they could interact, to focus not on just the one aspect, but to focus on all these different species. If it was catfish, if it was carp, and we weren't particularly interested, but to help promote it, let people do what they want to do, post up what they want to do, what they want to post, and then, like I said, even if Jeff or myself weren't that interested in that aspect of fly fishing, just let it grow, see what reaction they got from the members, and it just started. It took off, and we got the trout anglers, every aspect. They were coming on board. So then we decided to do a few events where we do the multi-species that I talked about earlier on Chew. We've also done a multi-species predator on Grapham, which is pike, perch, and zander. and I normally, very early season on the Trout, we'll do a 1 day on Rodeford or Colliford, whatever the water levels are suiting, on the Browns. We've been very fortunate that we've had a lot of partners, sponsors that have got involved, and we've had some very good prizes. But the whole thing, even though it is a competition, the emphasis is always on having fun, not to take it too serious. And if it all works and it does, you do very well, you'll go home with a very nice prize. But it's not all about the prize, and that we've been very strong on trying to get that message across. Just enjoy the day, and that enabled people that would never ever think about doing any form of competition. They've come along and they supported it and they've enjoyed it, and some of them have done reasonably well, some of them haven't done very well, but they keep coming back because it's the community we've created. To find us, well, we're on Facebook as Fluff Chuckers. Jeff runs the Fluff Chuckers on Instagram, and we're in the process of doing something on a website that I'm not in a position to say too much about just at the moment, but it's coming in probably the next 4 to 6 weeks, and something new again. But it will all be under the Fluff Chuckers banner, really. It's not a massive community, but we're 3,000 plus members in the group. There's a lot of people from outside that don't join the group but are regularly viewing it because it is a public group, so that the exposure's quite big, really, in the fly community. And if it was just pike or just brown trout, it probably wouldn't have the same appeal. It's certainly building. It's building month on month. So that's Fluff Chuckers for you, really. And it was a way for us to. It's a way for us to show what we do. But the main thing was, is getting as many people involved as possible. That's what it's about for us.
I think that sounds absolutely fantastic. And, I talk on here a lot about communities and building communities, and this is just the perfect example of it. So hopefully you'll go and have a look at that if you're on Facebook, and go and join, or at least have a look. And you've got me interested, Colliford or Rodeford early season as well. So I'll keep an eye out for that as well. And you heard Rodney's mentioned Jethro. He's been on the podcast a couple of times. We talked about his passion for pike, and also we did a live episode from Chew where he put me onto a very nice pike, which is worth a listen as well. And you're getting a sense of Rodders now, and also you'll have one of Jethro and what they're trying to put back into the community and stuff like that. I can only shout loudly from the rooftops about. So I'm thrilled to hear, and it's developing, growing, and I wish you every success with that. But let's come back to your fishing now. I know we were talking off mic, and obviously we're almost in the countdown for the start of the season, but you've talked about permit, you've talked about Jack Crevalle, you've talked about bonefish as well. Does that mean going abroad is on your radar right now?
Yeah, we've got a trip lined up at the very end of April and into the first 2 weeks of May at Baja, and it's Jeffrey's 40th birthday, so he's got this dream of running down the Man and having a large rooster off of the beach. And as we spoke before we come on air, it's not running down the Man with me. It's, as Jeffrey says, running down with my nan. So I'm spending some time in the gym to get fit and lose a bit of weight, and hopefully I can surprise Jeffrey a little bit, and I might get to that rooster before him, which he won't be happy about. but yeah, so it will be that, and no doubt there'll be other species that we'll be able to tackle whilst we're on the beaches. But we're big into going on the beaches and doing it DIY, or maybe the out. When we've been on the Caribbean side, we've always hooked up with Nick Dembo and spent a few days with Nick and several days on our own doing the DIY. So a bit of a mix match, and that's the type of fishing we like, and that's what we're going to do at Baja. We've got a guide giving us a hand, and we've got a lot of time on our own as well. So we'll see what happens. I've never caught a rooster. I hope that I manage to achieve that this coming year. Jeffrey's had a couple already, but he hasn't had that big one, and it's a dream for him now. It used to be the permit, now it's the rooster, and I know that he will put every effort into achieving his dream. I shall tag along and see what I can do. I don't know. It's not my. It's probably. It might become my favourite species, but my favourite species in the whole world are those mid-sized tarpon. To be honest, to me that is. We had a tarpon party in Mexico, and they were anywhere from 12 to 40 pound, and they weren't monsters, but what fun! I cannot think of better fun. It reminded me so much, really. We were fishing 10 weights, but it felt like having 11-pound sea trout on a 5-weight fly rod in the dark. It really did. It was just chaos, absolute chaos. And I would like to go out maybe and have a really big 100-pound plus, but that wouldn't be what really done it for me. Another afternoon or day on multiple tarpon around that sort of 25-30 pound mark is just heaven to me. Best fish in the world.
Yeah, I think I've talked on here before. I think that would be the one if I could get something about, and they are a pretty special fish. I'm with you. I'm not interested in butching up a 150-pound tarpon. Those mini or baby tarpon are right up my street too. So I'm with you on that. And for listeners as well, Rodney mentioned Running Down the Man, which I think was probably one of the first proper cool fly fishing films. And as he says, it's set in Baja, and you're looking for these rooster fish who, I know we've had Matt Harris on here, and I think we agreed that they're probably the most photogenic fish there are. The name gives a clue to what they look like, rooster fish, but it involves spotting them just outside of the surf and running down to try and make a cast at them. And if I don't know, it'd be much better if we were able to support these things, these films. But if it is on YouTube or you can see clips of it, watch it, because it was, I think it's Frank Smithhurst, wasn't it, Running Down the Man?
Yeah.
A great, amazing film. And that set, I think, the standard for how fly fishing was viewed, wasn't it?
Without a doubt. And it just, these videos and films, they're open doors. I mean, that a lot of this was happening a long time ago, but some of the more up to date ones. I mean, they're just opening up the world to what is possible, and it's not all about going out to a lodge in a skiff and being guided by somebody for 7 days and spending an awful lot of money. There's a place for it, but if you've got some ability and you're a little bit, you're happy to be adventurous, there's a whole world out there that it's incredible fishing and not necessarily going to cost you your house and a wife. Maybe will probably cost you a wife, but maybe not the house.
I remember when we fished the test, we got an invite up there, a group of us. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. And one of the most memorable moments for me was you, I, and Jethro just sitting on the bank. And we talked for absolutely ages about life in general, about fishing. And one of the things I remember was, and you've said it in the interview today as well, about your love for punk rock. It's one of the most dreaded questions on this whole podcast that I ask people for our Fly Culture playlist on Spotify, the Road Trip Mix, I think it's called, to pick a tune. Do you want to pick a tune for me?
Yes. I would say, and it's pre-punk slightly, and it's Iggy Pop, Passenger.
Good choice. Good choice. That's going on. I will put that on a little bit later. Great choice. Here's before we sign up, sign off. We're just coming up an hour now. But one day, one piece of water, one species. What would it be? And where would it be?
I think a dream day would be to wake up on the Caribbean side of in Mexico, Demble's country, for the weather to have clouded in a little bit, to look at your mate and say, oh Christ, this isn't going to be a very good day, but we go anyway. It clears slightly and the water's dirty, the sargasso weeds in a bit, there's some red water, and then you see a shoal of rolling tarpon just off of the dirty water with the waves between. And to have a tarpon, 40, 50 pound, off the beach, no guide, just your mate, and the day ends up a proper good day. I think that's a perfect day for me.
I think that's beautiful. And that's a wonderful way for us to start winding up now. For people listening, let's remind them that Fluff Chuckers, search that out on Facebook. How about you, Rodders? How can people find you on social media? What are your handles?
Rodders on the Fly, Fluff Chuckers, Fly Fishing Fanatics, both on Facebook. Rodders on the Fly on Instagram. And there's links to my email, links to a website. They've only got to put in Rodders on the Fly and they'll find me. They'll find me.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being a guest. Thank you so much for being part of our community. We're lucky that we have people like you in our community that care about people, care about fishing, want to promote fishing, want to help people fishing. So I wish you every continued success. I hope the instructing stuff goes really well for you. And thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today. It's been brilliant catching up with you.
Thank you, Pete. It's been a pleasure to be asked to come on. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture podcast. We're lucky that we have this fly fishing community and we get to hear from people like Rodney that are such an integral and important part of it, and be able to let them tell their story as well. It's been wonderful to hear that story. Thank you so much for listening. As ever, there'll never be any charge for these. We do this because, well, I just love talking about fishing with people. So thank you so much for listening, and there'll be plenty more episodes coming along very, very soon.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.